Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Servants by Design podcast. Tell you what, do you know someone who has been unjustly fired from their ministry job? Maybe you're a pastor and you've been forced to resign. Man, how do you deal with that? What's the strategy? How does one heal from something like that? Well, tonight I've got a great guest. Dr. Matthew Tanner is here with us, and we're going to discuss that. I'm pretty excited. So, those who may not know, how shall I say this? Here at Servants by Design, our goal is to help you live a healthier, more connected, spirit filled life with yourself, with God, and with others. And you can check out more at our website, which is www.servantsbydesign.com, servantsbydesign.com. If you want to reach out and email us, you're more than welcome to do that at connect, CONNECT, at servantsbydesign.com. Now, real quick, sorry, man, I got to do a shameless plug here, real quick.
Go for it.
One of the cool things to celebrate doing these podcasts, these live podcasts and everything is we are doing a special on our courses that you can find at servantsbydesign.com, or you can check out, this is a long name, Communicate for Change is our parent company, Teachable Courses. But we are doing a deal on our Free to Be Me course and our Servants by Design leadership course. If you go to purchase those, we're giving 40% off right now, just to kind of celebrate and encourage people in their walk with Christ. Again, we do personality specific resources that help people understand their God-given design, how they interact with the world, how they communicate with the world, but also what best motivates and encourages them, but also how to recognize your distress patterns. Now, in the Free to Be Me profile, the cool thing about it is that we even have a renovation plan specific, tailored to you. In other words, a spiritual disciplines plan to help your spiritual formation in your own life. So I'm pretty excited about them. Yes, I'm biased, of course, but hey, that's kind of the deal. With that, I'm pretty excited. Cal Callison is in the house. Hey, Cal, how are you, sir? Good to have you with us. So we are going to do, the chat is active, everybody. And if you want to ask questions along the way, you're more than welcome to, but we may put those in what I love to call the parking lot and do those at the end, just to give us time, or we'll make sure we review them. If we don't get to your questions, we'll try to get to those at the end. And so that is the game plan with that. Matt, thank you. Thanks so much for being here. Everybody, I saw that he just released this book, The Wounded Pastor, a healing strategy for unjustifiable termination and forced resignation. And I know a lot of pastors, a lot of friends, a lot of guys who have been in those situations. I would just put it that way. And it just struck me. And so I connected with you and like, man, we've got to talk about this and just share this and help give a healing strategy. So, well, first off, Matt, let me read your. I'm cheating here, just so you know. I'm gonna read your bio.
I wrote it myself, so go ahead.
Oh, nice. Well done. I love it. So, Dr. Matthew Tanner was born in Belleville, Illinois, to Dr. Steve and Mary Tanner in March 19. Do you want me to give the year?
Go ahead, man. And look, can you? I mean, you can tell, man. Throw it out there.
Right, 1977. Matthew and his identical twin brother Joshua were given a 10% chance of survival through the night. Trusting in the sovereign plan of God, their parents dedicated Matthew and Joshua's lives to the Lord, and both have lived healthy lives in the service to the Lord. Dr. Tanner grew up in both Central and North Arkansas before graduating high school and moving to attend College of the Ozarks. It was there he completed a degree in administration of justice and psychology. While attending College of the Ozarks, Dr. Tanner met his wife, Heather, and they have been married since 2002. The Tanners are proud of their three daughters, Sarah, Shelby, and Samantha. After undergraduate school, Dr. Tanner attended Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is where we met,
Yep.
and earned a Master of Divinity degree in 2006, a Master of Theology, and a Doctorate of Ministry in December of 2020. Dr. Tanner has served as pastor for several churches in the state of Missouri, interim pastor for a church in South Dakota, and director of missions in his own ministry. He is currently is, at the publication of this book, lead pastor of Northside Baptist Church in Bernie, Missouri. Now, I promise I did read that before tonight.
That's okay, man. You read it better than I could have, so that was great.
Oh, gosh. Charlie, welcome, Charlie. Nice to have you here with us. And also, all right, so here's the dealio. So, everybody, here's how tonight's going to go. I'm going to have Matt tell you a little bit more about just how he's on this journey, how he came on this journey for this book. Then we're going to do some of the definitions within the book. Really, what is unjustifiable termination or forced resignation? I think it's important. And Matt, I thought you did a great job of defining that in the book. Then we're going to kind of share some stories just to kind of show you just kind of how real this issue is. And then next, we are going to kind of walk through the strategy. I told Matt I really want to have something that you all can and come away from some good tips and helps if you are on this journey. So, all right, that's enough of me talking.
That's good. All right, y'all have a great night.
Right?
I like it. Good show.
Oh gosh. So Matt, let me ask you this. Why this topic? How, why did you do this? And from my understanding, this is really kind of your doctoral dissertation, was it not?
It was. In fact, I had several other dissertation ideas that I threw out there, and some of them were rejected outright by some professors you and I both know, and went through several different ideas, but was actually in the middle of my doctoral process whenever I was unjustifiably forced to resign a church.
Okay.
And then it hit me, really, this project actually came out of survival. I tell people I'm not the smartest, I'm just persistent, and I just don't give up, but
right.
I was going through the pain, the hurt, the struggle, and looking for something out there, a resource. I'm a book guy. I'm looking for what can I read that's going to give me something.
Yeah, it's us seminary guys.
Right? Just give me a book and we're fine,
Right, right.
That's why nobody likes to help us move, because our libraries.
That is so true.
It's just like, how many of these you have? But, there really wasn't anything out there. There was a few things that kind of danced around the outside of the subject, but there wasn't anything that just hit it head on and try to figure something out that's going to get some healing to take place and get some of these guys to, like myself, to be able to heal and get back into ministry. So this comes from years of hurt, years of heartache, years of healing, still on that journey. And just years of just talking to other guys. What I wanted to do is share my story, and I openly share a lot of that. But what I wanted to do is interview other guys that have been through it and have a really authentic conversation about what went right, what went wrong, how did you survive, and out of all that came the strategy that I really believe if guys will put these things in place, and there's some preventative stuff, there's some what to do to survive, but if you just put some of these things in practice, I wish I could say it would help it to never happen, but I can't say that, but at least it will help you survive the storm. And actually, the goal is to be healthier for it. So that's this was birthed out of a lot of tears, a lot of pain, and just trying to. There wasn't a resource out there, so God said, "You write it." So that's how we got to the Wounded Pastor.
Wow. Okay. All right. I do appreciate how you say survive the storm. Um, because it is a storm. I know in my own experience, I had a couple of pastors who knew me, but I really didn't know them well, kind of acquaintance of acquaintance kind of situations. And they rallied next to me, and they just encouraged me to
Yeah,
say, your best years of ministry are ahead, even though you don't feel like it right now. But you're right. There wasn't like a book out
right.
there that was like, okay, this stuff just happened to you. Here's what you can do,
Yeah,
kind
at
of a thing.
least a start. And
Right.
and it's amazing you had some of those guys that rally around you. But one of the things that I hear a lot of times from other wounded pastors that contact me is you feel like you're the only one going through it. Like somehow you're
Mm.
broken, or it's very isolating.
Mhm.
And one of the things that has excited me about this project is the community that it builds. Are like, maybe I'm not the only one that this has happened to. There are other wounded pastors out there that are hurting, and you can get through the storm, and you can get to the other side of it.
Mhm. Mhm. You can. So let me ask you this: when someone I know when I first started reading the book, and everybody can see I got all my little notes and I got stuff written here because you've written it well. I will say this: it's very organized, it's logical, it's sequential. How you have that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the things I appreciated at the very beginning is I was reading it. I said, "Well, what about that person that says, well, maybe you should have gotten fired,' or kind of a thing." There have been situations where I know some churches that the pastor who was there, I you I hate to say it this way, but sometimes you wondered about their call, kind of a thing.
Right.
I'm like, man, how can you treat the people this way? But that's not what we're talking about. You did a great job of defining, okay, what's justifiable and what's unjustifiable. Can you take a few minutes to kind of walk through why you defined what you defined, or what is like forced resignation or unjustifiable termination?
Yeah, and you nailed it. The reason that was included, you actually hit the nail on the head, because when I was going through my own journey, and I've talked to others, one of the things that you do hear from well-meaning people, but sometimes I liken them to Job's friends, is that, well, maybe you just missed your calling. And in my
Yeah.
experience, I even had somebody, they meant well trying to help the situation, but they're like, well, maybe you're just not called to be a pastor. I even had one person tell me one time, well,
Mm.
you just went into the pastorate because your dad's a pastor. And I'm like, well, his advice was telling me don't.
Right.
you
My
know
dad told me the same thing too, by the way. Yeah.
right. So and I think my parents are watching, so love you, Dad, glad I took your advice. But yeah, the difference is that, and again, I want to lead. I want to tease people and say, hey, I'm trying to get better at this, and saying, hey, and go buy the book. But the reality is that there's really four different quadrants. You've got your
Mhm.
really healthy church situations. The pastor's not perfect, the people are not perfect, but yet
Right.
they're living in faith community together, and they're making mistakes together, they're growing together, and
Right.
and they're building God's kingdom. So there's no termination. But then you the difference between justified is that there's a toxic, well, it actually goes into another category, but there's an ethical or moral failure that has taken place. There's a biblical mandate that has been defied that
Yep.
disqualifies them from becoming or being a pastor, and
Mhm.
therefore they have to be let go. Now, I found in my research that many times, unfortunately, those that have justified terminations, the churches actually do a better job at taking care of them post termination. um, Unjustified termination is where, again, the pastors that I talk to, and especially myself, we're very quick at pointing out our own flaws. We know the mistakes that we made, and looking back at the situations I've been in, there were flaws, but there were non-fatal flaws that were elevated to the level of fatal flaws due to a myriad of reasons. Misplaced leadership, um, just leadership acting unbiblically,
Mm-hmm.
the mindset that I've even had a church member tell me one time, I was born here, I'll die here, and we can get another pastor, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I could spend the rest of the time talking about the reasons that mankind comes up with to put these pastors in the category. Many times it's failure to follow God's vision, it's failure to follow God's leadership as the pastor has been placed there by God to shepherd the flock. um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really, of the top 10 reasons that pastors are forced out, number 9 and 10 in frequency is moral and ethical failure. The rest of them, and this research is out there, the rest of them are just any reason that mankind can come up with.
Right.
But there's no biblical mandate that has been defied. It's just we don't want to follow God's vision. We don't like the preacher anymore. We're just going to make life difficult. Either we're going to outright fire you, or we're just going to make life difficult until we just wear you down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
hopefully that describes the difference.
it it does. You had put in here in the book, I'm quoting page 16, we got to cite our sources.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
But you said justified forced termination and resignations occur when pastors have either been terminated or given the singular option to resign, meaning that if they don't resign, then termination will follow with just biblical cause. And you kind of go into more detail on
Absolutely.
it's got to be just biblical cause. But
Absolutely.
you continue to say unjustified terminations and forced resignations are completely different and have in their grasp a much higher number of pastors than the category of the justified that you previously mentioned. So you just stated most of the ones that when pastors get let go, they're for unjustifiable reasons.
Absolutely.
Now, I loved how you put in here, you quote an article from SBC Life publication. And you said, although not a scientific study, kind of a thing, it was probably an opinion poll kind of a thing. But the top reasons for unjustified in this research was number one, control issues.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen that with some, not me, of course. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
of course.
Never me. No,
That's
I'm
why
just kidding.
we're perfect. It's everybody else.
Right. Everybody, we're kidding.
Yeah,
sarcasm.
a joke. Can you scroll the disclaimer across the
I
bottom?
probably should. Oh gosh, two poor people skills on the part of the pastor. That is one thing we at Servants by Design kind of help with is how to. It's all a communication model, and
Right.
it's how the personality behind communication and how to connect with people at the speed of conversation.
Right.
Number 3 is a pastor's leadership style being too strong. 4, the church already being in conflict prior to the pastor's arrival. Gosh, I've had a ton of those fellow brothers who have gone through that. Number 5,
Absolutely.
pastor's leadership style being too weak. Now, I found that interesting, and I wish it was defined a little bit. I'm going to have to go back and find that SBC Life publication because I was like, well, what does that mean, too weak? And that's not really the point of. I don't want to spend too much time on that,
Yeah.
but it is fascinating how a lot of it does seem to be people skills, but I think that's on both sides of the issue. I know in my situation, when I look back, some of my people skills with other leadership was not so great, kind of a thing.
Well, that's where I'm going with the flaws should not be fatal. I mean, I look back on my first pastorate and I'm like, I wouldn't want me as a pastor. So many things. I was just trying to survive seminary, a new child, and be a pastor.
Right.
But if you notice, just hearing that back, which it's so weird and cool at the same time to hear some of those things, come back to you. The perspective of all of those things is, like you said, it's not a biblical perspective that informs the flaw. it is a consumer perspective.
Yes.
It's too strong. It's too weak. It's too this. It's too that. That's the key. The problem is that their perspective of the pastor's leader is not informed by God's word. It's informed by the consumer's view.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's where that's, I think, the principle behind those things
Yeah.
those things that you read.
Yeah. Gosh, that's insightful. Because we have created in the hopes of trying to get people to our churches, and I'm pointing the fingers at me because I'm guilty of this. In trying to get people to come to the church, I have used marketing techniques of that consumer style to get people to come to church. Come here. We've got a great kids program. Or,
Yeah, exactly. Well, and some of that is okay. Let me not go too far with it. But the problem is where using marketing and consumer techniques where that pushes into ownership instead of just let's use some tools that man has created to I mean, we've got the best product in the world. We should be marketing it. I mean, we're marketing the gospel. But where that marketing moves into ownership to where then we begin to define the terms instead of scripture defining the terms, that's when we begin to see the pastor as employee and not
that's a
God's
great
called man.
clarification. What a great clarification. Thank you for that. That's
Yeah.
insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the heart behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. See, now you got me pondering. Everybody sees, oh, there goes Stephen. He's processing again.
The rest of the night's just going to be this.
I know.
That's why you got to do this. It just really lends that, It's just
right. Mine's
really,
not as long as yours. Mine's only this big.
Yeah.
This is about all there is, just so you know.
This is what doctorate does to you. It does this to you.
Well, share with us, if you can, or if you're able to, some stories to help for those that may not realize what some of these pastors are going through. And, just what are some of the stories that you have encountered from some of these wounded pastors?
Yeah. And one of the things, I've got a copy too, by the way.
Is yours signed? Mine's not signed. No, just kidding.
You're going to bring that up, invite me up there for coffee and I'll sign it all you. I'll sign it twice.
Sounds like a plan. I love it.
But one of the things I do in the book, and this comes out of the stories that I got back from the interviews, and the one thing is that the innocent and guilty will remain anonymous. I will not give names other than my story. My name's on there, so I'll put my story out there. But I start each chapter with quotes from, and I just attributed them to a wounded pastor, and just kind of tying back to what we've already talked about. This is a quote from one of the pastors before chapter 4. And it says, "My offenses were things like taking the order of service out of the bulletin, moving a coat rack, moving the church offices, wanting to know more of what committees were doing. I was accused of changing the church bylaws that were changed by a committee and voted on by the entire church without dissent. There was no accusation of immoral or unethical actions." So it's anything and everything, and that's the sad thing. For me personally, I've had a 2 Peter 3 used against me, so that I've been called a heretic, based on just trying to teach a correct understanding and a deeper understanding of God's word. So apparently, according to at least one church member in this world, fire is going to rain down on my head at any moment. It's been probably 5 or 10 years since that's happened, so it hadn't happened yet, but just fair warning. And I say that.
So you're just saying we need to keep our distance for a little while.
Yeah, it's a good thing that there's some distance there. But I just personally, me, that some of the things that
Mm,
pastors are dealing with in the trenches, where deacons meetings, and not all deacons are bad. Scroll the disclaimer, but deacons meetings, business meetings, becoming a battlefield.
yeah.
And there was one church that I pastored that it was in the middle of the battle, and every time you would get together, it was this war for control and leadership. And I remember very distinctly, an older deacon in the church, just in my office at the church with the rest of the deacons kind of sitting around in a circle, comes over to me and gets in my face, and just face nose to nose says, "You need to figure out how we do things around here, boy."
Mm,
And I just had no idea how to react. I had one pastor that was taken through a court battle, over petty things, just because it's not enough to just get them out. They wanted to turn the knife and
mhm.
make it hurt. Um, Man, just uh, another thing that happened to me, and again, I feel I'm more comfortable. I do put some stories in the book, and I'll let people go to those,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I feel more comfortable about sharing my stories, because then if there's any fallout, it's on me. But I remember at one church that I pastored, I could see the writing on the wall per se. I could see that things were coming to a close, and what happens is you begin to try to go into survival mode. But I guess I wasn't getting the memo and moving fast enough, and so one of the most painful times of my life, my ministry, and my marriage, was when I had a gentleman in the church began to spread rumors around town that I had been unfaithful to my wife, and named names, um, of
Whoa.
of the other couple. And in the reality is that there was no way, no, I was never ever at any point alone with this other person. I had plenty of witnesses that, I mean, hand wrote letters and turned it in the church, like, this is not possible. And my wife, absolutely amazing woman of God, who we kind of weathered that storm together. But the only reason that this took place was because they would stop at nothing to get me out.
Right.
And you know he knew it wasn't true. He didn't care it wasn't true. It was, this will have the intended effect. And that's an extreme example. A lot of times it's a much slower, just a slow, you know, kind
Chinese water torture is how I like to call it.
yeah, exactly. It's that drip of just
Right.
constant, just complaining, constant battle, and really the research calls it a mobbing effect. That they just set up camp against you, and they just keep going until you're done. So briefly, that's just a couple of, and again, that's one of the more extreme
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah. But it does let people know that, I mean, there's a whole gamut of just what pastors are going through, and what people, what sometimes people will go do
Absolutely.
to whether it's control factor. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why they're there, what things happen, but
Yeah,
more than anything else, it's happening. That's the issue.
that's the
And
point. Yeah,
how can we bring, a sense of healing to probably pastors that we know, or even current pastors, or pastors who are still trying to do that healing journey. How can we
yeah.
help support them? Real quick, everybody, we are about halfway through our time together, and I want to make sure I get this out. And I'm putting in the comments to everywhere. this is the link to the Amazon link to Dr. Tanner's book. So if you want to click on that, grab a copy there through Amazon. That's probably the best way to find it, to get a hold of it. Also, I want to direct people to your blog.
Absolutely.
So because there's other resources, it's your website and blog. There,
Yeah.
I'm going to put that in the comment section as well.
Yeah, I will say that I'm in the process now. I already own the URL, and I'm in the process of kind of transitioning the WordPress blog into a full website.
Oh, great.
And so it's not up yet, but the URL that I do own is woundedleadership.com.
Okay, so I'm going to put that in there,
So,
even though it's not up, everybody, but at least you
but
can get it.
hopefully within the next few weeks that will be live, and there will be a redirect. So if you go into the woundedpastor.wordpress.com, it will redirect you to
Okay.
Wounded Leadership. So on that new website, they will be able to get the book. There'll be just so much more that I can do with it. Just got to find time to build it. So that's
Sure.
coming.
Right.
Something that's going to be in the process.
Right. Very cool. Okay. Well, I want to make sure everybody had that, because now we're going to move into two last parts. We're going to talk about some of what the strategy of healing looks like, the 4 parts of that.
Absolutely.
And then I want to do a Q&A for anybody that wants to, maybe ask you some questions through the chat, and then we can actually do kind of have some fun interactions and discussions. So
Perfect.
all right. And if no one asks any questions, you look out, because I'm going to hit you hard. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm
I'm just
ready. I'm an
teasing.
open book, man. Just throw it at me. I did set my dad up with some softballs. If nobody asked questions, I said, "Here's what you asked." That so I was ready. I'm prepared.
I love it. I love it. All
Yeah,
right.
he did say he was gonna. He did tell me that he was gonna ask in there. The book's all great and all, but tell us more about your dad. Yeah. So I've got him set up. He's ready.
I love it. I love it. Oh gosh. All right. So let's start off with this.
Yeah.
The rest of the book, you go through a little bit more of stories. There's another section of biblical stories, and I wanted to kind of say those for people to go to the book, because
Absolutely.
you reference in the healing section of people to go back
Yeah.
and read some of those stories, or actually contemplate or take some time to study what some of these biblical narratives of where these things have happened and who they've happened to, and what was the process through those. So
Yeah.
but I wanted to make sure we had time. But I get accused sometimes of calling it the Stephen skip sections,
Hey, I like it.
So we'll go back
Yeah.
if there's time, but I felt like, to give that context, I wanted to kind of, let's walk through the strategy. So what are
Yeah.
the 4 parts of the strategy, and how did you come up with those, or what was that process of developing those?
Yeah, and what I want to say, and it is something that Stephen, you and I talked about before we went live, is that
Mhm.
this is not necessarily one of those books. And I even say in the forward, the part of books that nobody reads, that uh, you know that this is not a sequential, or doesn't have to be a sequential book.
Right.
Because if you're in the throes of the hurt and stuff, go to the strategy. Just
Mhm.
camp out there. You can go back and be informed and fed by the rest of it later. Um, but like I said at the beginning, the strategy just came out of my own journey.
Okay.
That, and as I started as I started reading the interviews and the talking with guys that have been through it, I found this pattern start to develop in the lives of those that have been wounded pastors. And it's like building a house. The darkest level is in the basement. No light, no windows, and that's the economic level. Because again, don't want to give away the research. Go get the book. But um, most wounded pastors that get justifiably forced out have underwhelming severance, or
Yeah.
or none at all.
Right.
And
Well,
so,
I think you quoted one where they didn't get it. One person only got maybe 2 months,
yeah,
kind of a thing, of any
yeah,
kind of severance, if I remember right.
if you get 6 months, then you are the exception. And so, um, and most pastors are not good at preparing for that sort of thing, or we naively think it's probably not going to happen.
Mhm.
But the thing about the economic
Yep.
strategy, if you're not paying the bills and not able to provide for the family, you're stuck there. You can't go any further.
Mhm.
Um, so, I detail some preventative things in that part of the strategy, but I detail some things that you can do if you find in that yourself in that position, to kind of ease the economic burden. And part of that economic strategy is you just got to weather the storm. And something that I've
Mhm.
reminded of today is that storm's not forever.
Mhm.
And remind yourself of God's word, the Psalms, live in the Psalms, but it's where God will always provide. And looking back, my wife and I have this, we jokingly say, God's doing the math right now because it shouldn't add up.
Mm.
But, you know, as long as you're stuck in that economic fog, you're not going to heal anywhere else.
Right.
Um, the,
Well, let me say this real quick. So
yeah,
the 4 steps that you outline, I wanna make sure I clarify this, is
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
economic, emotional, spiritual,
Spirit,
and then leadership was kinda, how I looked at it.
absolutely.
Um, I will say, and I told you I'd say this before, I would just be upfront with everybody. We did a little bit of a pre-show notes and stuff, but,
Yeah,
um, I doubted when I first started, I was like, "Economics, should that really be the first one?"
he doesn't know
I'm
what he's
sitting there.
talking about.
Right. And it's kind of funny, the owner of Simplify Church, Josh Henry, he always uses this phrase where he likes to say, "Jesus juke," you don't
Yeah,
wanna Jesus juke it, kind of a thing. And I thought, "Well, am I just trying to Jesus juke it?" That's where my brain
yeah,
went. And then the
yeah.
more I read, how you laid that out, I'm like, "No, you're right." I mean, I've been there. You're right. We as pastors, we don't prepare well. We just think,
Mhm.
oh, I'm going to be serving God. God's going to take care of me, that kind of a thing. But it is difficult. I know at one time I had 5 part-time jobs. I was just grasping at whatever I could. And you actually stuck on that. If I remember it, you said, sometimes we'll just take whatever we can just to try to just to make ends meet. And
Absolutely.
it's a highly stressful time. But I began to realize you're right until I got a sense of, okay, we are getting our needs met financially. Then the next stage occurred.
Absolutely.
I could,
Yeah,
because it was almost like crisis mode. You know what I mean? It was almost
absolutely.
like I've got to get this done. I got to do this. It's almost like when you're in a traumatic event, it's almost like, okay, I got to do triage right now. And
And that's
then I
exactly what
can
it is.
I
Yeah.
can address. And so
Yeah.
has that been the case for a lot of the interviews that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. And almost to a person, I could go through all the different jobs that they fall back to, and it is a lot of that. Just take whatever you can get, but then you find yourself thrust into the secular world, sometimes unfamiliar territory, which that's a whole other topic. But yeah, it just you just do your best to survive, and I also want to add into, don't underestimate the one of the things you want to do sometimes is, because you're hurt by the church, you want to shun the people of God and the ways that they want to help. One of the things that
Mm.
I've found is God just brings in these little threads of people that just want to bless you. And sometimes it's outside of the community you're in.
Mhm.
But I found those are just little sips of cool water in the desert. They go,
Yeah.
it's
Oh.
not they're not all bad.
Right. Right. Right.
And a lot of times you don't see those things until you look back. You don't fully understand the economic level until you get through it and you start to get to the others. Then you look back in the basement and you go, wow,
Mm-hmm.
those are some milestones. And what I challenge people to do, and I think I put this in the book, is set up, like the Old Testament talks a lot about setting up stones of remembrance. And
Mm-hmm.
what my wife and I try to do in my family, we try to quantify those things, because as we get into the other strategies, seeing what God does in the economic strategy
Mm-hmm.
will actually help in the other parts of the strategy go quicker and much stronger.
Okay. Okay. I think I missed the Stones of Remembrance part. My
If
bad.
it's not
Sorry.
in there, it should have been. And I just
I could have
everybody, when
missed
you
it.
get your copy, pencil that in.
Uh, all right. So for the economic side, let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that. Like, give us one of the specific strategies that you have stated. Now, I there's twofold of your strategies on economic.
Yeah.
One was when you're in it, and then the other's to prepare for it.
Right.
So kind of a thing. But if someone's in it, they've experienced it. What is what's a tip or a help or something that you can provide?
Oh yeah, and again, I don't want to give away too much. Got to keep teasing a little bit. Uh, but honestly, I'll go a little bit spiritual with that. But it's okay to be a tent maker for a little while.
Yeah.
And one of the things that and man, I'm a wounded pastor. Just because I wrote this doesn't mean I perfected it. I'll just say that I'm still learning these things.
Okay.
But finding, because we're called to ministry, and then we find ourselves working, you know, construction and working retail and working
Yeah.
whatever we can find, and trying to find ministry within that.
Mhm.
Your calling hasn't changed. You're in a little bit different field, and looking
Mm.
intentionally looking during those economic times. And what that does is that takes the focus off of the dollars and cents, because here's the thing: God promises that he will provide what we need.
Mhm.
That's written pretty explicitly in scripture. It may not look like what we think it's going to. It may be a little bit rough around the edges, but God is going to provide, our basic needs. So getting yourself off of I'm stuck here and trying to look at these things as, how can I see God working even in these things?
Mm.
How can I view this even as, this is still part of my calling,
Mhm.
to shepherd?
Mhm.
How can I shepherd somebody here?
Mhm.
Um, but this might not sound very, very hopeful, but sometimes the economic strategy is just surviving day by day.
Yep.
You go in, you put the time in, you clock out at the end of the day, and then as you're driving home or whatever, you're praying in your mind and your heart, Lord, saying, Lord, I pray this time is short. Um, Help me get through the process. But really,
Mhm.
the preventative things, really, on the economic strategy, if we as pastors will get better at the preventative things, it will make, if we have to go through this part of the strategy, it will make it faster.
I
It will
I
make
will I do want to share that being a tent maker, because in my realm, it forced me to become a tent maker. So to have another, secular job.
right,
But I love your perspective on, and it was really helpful for me. You've heard the phrase "bloom where you're planted," kind of a thing.
right,
And I
absolutely,
think it's the same thing that wherever we are, that is where our ministry is. We may not. I was guilty about, I'm going to have this church and we're going to do great things for you, God. We're going to be on fire for you and we're going to get all this stuff done. And
yeah,
we play and God laughs.
Yeah.
But
And God goes, "Who wrote the book?" Anyway.
right. But I have found, just like those pastors told me, your best years of ministry are ahead of you. I have found that the day-to-day ministries, I'll give you an example. I was able to have the opportunity to have something available where I could do it on a full-time basis. A little bit of learning, kind
Yeah.
of a thing that I had to go through. But then I began to travel to different courthouses out of Missouri and Kansas, out in the Kansas City area.
Yeah.
And I went to one courthouse and they said, Stephen, you are always in a good mood. You're always smiling and stuff when you come in. And it
What's
was right
wrong with you?
and right. And God said right then and there, he goes, you need to say why. And
Yeah.
I said, I'm a man of deep faith. I know God to be real. And that gives me the strength to be where I'm at, kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
And it opened up, that moment opened up spiritual conversations there. But then before you knew it, at another courthouse, they were asking conversation. It was the same thing. It was almost like a domino effect. I'm like, okay, Lord, this is, where I'm at for right now,
Well,
kind of.
in the courthouses didn't change.
No.
Your perspective changed of where God had you in. And yes, it's a valley, it's a desert, but yet there's still, your calling hasn't changed, even though you're in
Mhm.
a momentary desert.
I,
And so looking for those things.
yeah, I at the time I was like, wow, I'm having more spiritual conversations with people who don't know Christ outside of full-time ministry
Yeah.
than I did when I was full-time ministry. And I was like, wow, and it really kind of opened up my heart a little bit more in the healing process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, I did start to say at one point, I think Satan spends more time in church than the average American.
There's so many ways I could go with that, but I won't.
Right. Okay, so so with that, that's step one, or that, it's kind of the first stage. Let me put it that way. That how you put it.
Absolutely.
So what's the next stage? So I've got kind of my bearings now.
Yeah.
I'm doing the bivocational thing, as some would say, or I'm a tent maker, and
Yeah.
now and for those that don't know, tent maker is just a reference to Paul, who made tents. He made tents to pay for to have a living wage so he could do ministry as well. So that's what we're
Absolutely. Yeah.
referencing.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that then once we kind of get our bearings, then what's that next stage of the healing strategy?
Yeah, and this is one thing that kind of surprises people, because then you would think that the next thing you would go to is the spiritual strategy, but this is where it ties back into the biblical the biblical part, or the biblical background part in
Okay.
the book, is when David was running from Absalom, he wrote, I think, 12 different psalms. And if you look at, and this is really kind of reading and living through the Psalms was part of what led me to the emotional and then spiritual strategy. Because if
Okay.
you look at the Psalms, the first half of the Psalm is David being very raw with his emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second half of a lot of those Psalms were him basically worshiping God. God, you are this, you are that.
You're God. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but it was the first half of the Psalms, he was very raw with his emotions.
Mm-hmm.
How long, oh Lord? How many times does David say, how long, oh Lord, am I going to be doing this?
Right.
I coin a phrase, and every time I share this, people love it. I coin a phrase called post traumatic spiritual stress disorder.
Yeah. I got my note on it. Yep.
You
Yep.
like that?
I loved it.
So, and because the reality is that because of some of the stories that I shared, some of the things I've been through, and talking with wounded pastors, we have scars from the ministry, and we have hurts, especially when they attack our wives and our families and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And until we deal with some of those some of the emotional damage, and the reason I attribute it to post-traumatic spiritual stress disorder is because we've been in battle and we now carry triggers that raise the stress, that raise the anxiety. You know, just if you don't believe me, if you're a pastor that's been through this, just think of business meetings. You know, what does that do physiologically to you?
Yeah. Where's my Pepto? I need my Pepto.
Yeah, heartburn starts to rise.
Right.
You know, but that the test, every time I say this, the test always passes, because it's like, yeah, I'm fine. Then you start, well, what about this? And you're like, oh, wait a minute. You know, maybe I'm not fine. And I hesitated at first, using the term, PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder, because I don't want people to go, oh, you're trying to compare to soldiers and stuff like that. But I called a friend of mine. This is one of my favorite stories, in this process. Called a friend of mine who is a former is a Marine. You never say former Marine. Sorry, any Marines out there. And I asked him. I said, "What about those in ministry? Can we say? Can we use this term?" And I still have this letter that he wrote back to me. And he said, absolutely, pastors can claim the fact that they suffer from post traumatic spiritual stress disorder. Because here's the thing. He said, when I was deployed over in Iraq and Afghanistan, he said, I knew who the enemy was. It was clearly identifiable enemy most of the time. But he said, I also had a rear base to go to where other people were standing guard. And for a moment, I could let my guard down.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, a lot of times for pastors, the enemy's not that easily identifiable, or the enemy is someone who should not be an enemy. And so, and the other thing is, as pastors, is you never get to let your guard down. So, he said, absolutely, there's consequences of the battle. So that's why you have to go through the emotional categories, because you have to learn how to shore up and heal from those emotional wounds to then have an honest conversation with God. It's the pattern of the Psalms. God, how long is this going to go on? How long is everybody in the world going to hate me? But yet you are God. So the emotional healing will lead to the spiritual, but don't skip over it.
Yeah. One of the things that I've really appreciated about when I was first introduced to Servants by Design and the profiles is that they do a good job of giving insight onto not only God's design, but how we act out in stress.
Absolutely.
And it has made me so self-aware to know at what level. There's we teach on 3 degrees of distress, kind of a thing, like 3-degree burns, first degree, second degree. But but we give the tools on knowing, okay, these are the psychological needs, the motivational needs that you need to help you kind of work through that. There's certain needs that aren't getting met. So it's really fascinating. And that's not really meant to be a shameless plug, but I'll do it again.
There it is. Well, but the reality is that that's where these things go together, because in that emotional category, you've got to learn what your triggers are. You've got to learn how do you respond to those things.
Right.
Because going ahead to the last for a moment, the leadership, one of the things that I found in my research is there's a lot of times we as pastors, when we get to what we think are leadership lessons, they're actually survival lessons. How can I keep this from happening again? How can I keep everybody at arm's length? And, I'm going to make sure I'm not hurt again. That's not true leadership lessons. That's just trying to survive. And so if you don't understand how your emotional quotients, how they work, how you tick, and how you can heal from that, you'll never get to that balcony level.
Yep. Hey, I'm going to make this offer to everybody. We're 54 minutes in. I'm going to put my email in the chat, connect@servantsbydesign.com. If you are a pastor and you are wounded One of the things that I will do as part of Servants by Design is for Pastor, I will give you a free to be me profile, and we'll do a consultation with you, because I know there's a fight for resources. Matt, just as you shared earlier,
Yeah, that's
where do I
beautiful,
go?
man. That
What
is
do I
absolutely
do?
beautiful.
And so I'll do that. I just need you to shoot me an email there. We'll have a conversation, and then we'll get you that free profile just to help you.
That's
Because
awesome. Yeah, and that's what it's going to take to help get these guys over. It's resources like that
mhm.
that the wounded pastors need to get a hold of to just start that emotional healing. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, all right. So that's two stages.
Yeah,
We're taking longer than I have, but we're having a great conversation. I'm
I
loving
know,
it.
right? I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody,
Uh,
track with us. We're almost to question and answer. I promise.
right. Right. Yeah. And we'll review anybody who's put comments in the comment section. We'll review those and talk about those as well. So,
Absolutely.
um, so now, so we've done kind of the first stage is economic, second,
Yep.
emotional, third stage. What's that third stage then?
Yeah, that's the spiritual category. That's where, again, I'll be really brief here. That's the David crying out, saying, "But you, God,
But you're still God.
but you're still God," and that's where, man, that's where some of the deepest healing begins to take place.
Mhm.
That's where you begin to cry out to God. That's where you begin to not not blame God's bride anymore. You began to,
Oh. Okay,
yeah,
excuse me.
no,
Let
you
let
had
me
to
let me
say
turn around.
that,
Why don't you take the knife out of my back?
right? I don't like it either. Um, but you know, um, again, this is not in the book. This is actually something that God did in my life after the book. So I'm already working on the revised edition, and it's just been out a month. But um, here's one of the best descriptions of the spiritual healing category that's not in the book. Um, as I went through my last situation, angry at God, all the things. And
Yeah.
if you're a wounded pastor, you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. And I read through Job, and actually, it was a buddy of mine sent me to the last chapter in Job, and it's something I'd read it 100 times. And Job says something that just absolutely blew me away. He says at the very end, he said, "With my ears, I have heard you." But then he goes, and I'm paraphrasing, but then he goes, "But now with my eyes, I want to see you."
Mm.
That's the spiritual healing. Going from just hearing God in the healing process,
Mhm.
but seeing God even in the suffering.
Mhm.
Um, and that's when you begin to be okay with, um, you know, God, suffering has been part of my calling. It's been part of my life, and that's where you begin to worship again. Um, Truly worship again. Um, and worship not with closed fists. Um,
Oh, right?
there's another one.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
but that's the healing is going from just hearing God to seeing Him
Mhm.
in the process. Yeah,
Mm. Mm.
that's getting planted back into the streams of living water. you
Right,
know,
right.
that's what that is. So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's where that takes place.
yeah. I find it interesting, a lot of people are like, "Well, why didn't you put the spiritual one first?" And in all
Yeah,
fairness, I thought the same thing at the beginning. I
yeah,
was like, "Why is the
yeah,
economic one first?" But as I pondered through and processed, just kind of ruminated on everything, I was like, "Well, I don't know. I don't wanna, as I said earlier, I don't want to Jesus you can, oh, you
yeah.
just get your relationship with God, you're good to go."
Yeah,
Or
well, but that doesn't work because I've
eh
had people tell me that. Hey, just trust God more.
right.
And if I can be raw here, I wanted to tell them, I trusted God, and this is where it got me. To be quite honest,
Yeah. Every wounded pastor out there right now who's listening and watching this later is saying,
Yeah.
"Yep,
Yeah.
yep,
Check that box.
yeah,
And that's why these things build on each other, because if you don't go through them in order, you'll miss something
hmm
in the process. But every wounded pastor, when you get to that spiritual healing category, you will be gloriously broken,
mm, mm,
and that's a good thing.
hmm hmm So as we've taken this journey and we've hit, the economic, the emotional, and the spiritual. Now I love your little house diagram, and now there's this bridge, and you put
Yeah,
there, and it's this leadership thing.
yeah,
It's really kind of a short chapter. You give some references of some books. That's what we seminary guys do. Oh, it's a good book. Oh, okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
good. But can you kind of encapsulate that for us a little bit about what you mean by the leadership development part of
Yes,
it now?
absolutely. And this is the ironic thing about the whole book is that my emphasis in doctoral studies is leadership development. It's the shortest chapter. Uh, so, and
Uh,
all my leadership development professors are going, what did we teach him?
right.
But uh, that's where there's going to be a lot more coming down the pike. But
hmm
one of the reasons it's the shortest chapter is because I would venture to say most of the wounded pastors don't get there. I didn't get there for a long time. I'm still getting there. I like to say I'm firmly camped out on the balcony enjoying the view, but
hmm
you know, sometimes I go back into the spiritual floor and sometimes I go back into the emotional floor.
Right. It's not
Um,
just a.
it's not like, hey, I'm
It's.
there, I'm good, let's roll. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
sometimes I
messy.
think, let me put an elevator in this house. It'd be so much easier.
Right.
But what I mean by leadership development is, um, you're no longer looking at the speck in your brother's eye. You have turned over the church that have hurt you. You've given them over to the Lord, and say, Lord, it is your job to enact judgment or even blessing on your bride. Um, and you begin to pray for those that may need to be part of God's bride.
hmm
Um, and then you begin to look at yourself, not how can I find some survival techniques? How can I just put better armor on? Because then you'll end up a toxic leader and go back in the first chapter and look at the toxic leadership. But so what leadership development is, how can I be stronger and better as a leader to
hmm
go back into ministry and equip God's bride and lead God's flock stronger, more equipped, and a better leader than I was before. Not how can I keep this from ever happening again,
hmm
but how can I learn better leadership skills?
hmm
How
hmm
can I shepherd the sheep?
hmm
I'm learning stuff every day. But once you get out of the fog of the economic, the emotional, the spiritual, um, one book I read just recently, I had to look on my shelf to see it. It's called The Way of the Shepherd, and knowing the shape of your sheep. That's one of those leadership development lessons that I've learned after the fact.
hmm
And there's a little bit of grieving that takes place, and I'm like, why didn't I do that before? You don't have the capacity to incorporate those things in your life when you're hurting so bad. So being able to take those and go,
hmm
you know what? I can be a better leader. I can be a stronger leader. I can be a more biblical leader. And I'm not healing out of hurt. I'm not the wounded pup that every time you try to pet, you try to bite their hand off. You're the one that actually cares for the sheep and loves
hmm
God's bride again.
Yeah.
And just again, another reason why that chapter is kind of the shortest is because there's books upon books that have been written about how to be a better leader.
Yeah.
So my goal for that chapter wasn't necessarily to rehash all of those things, but to position yourself to where you can go to those things and actually begin to incorporate them, because it's the breaking up the fallow ground. It's putting those leadership seeds on ground that's going to grow, not on rocky ground out of hurt and heartache.
Yeah.
So that's the heart behind the leadership lessons. How can I grow stronger and better?
If there was one book that I would suggest out of what you put in there, and it wasn't Servants by Design, Free to Be Me book, everybody, I'm just saying. But the one book that stuck out as I was looking at all the different books, and this is just your references in the whole book, but what I think was great for leadership development, but you put it in the emotional one, I think, was Ken Sandé's Peacemaker, because and that'd be one book I just totally hands down would recommend for folks, because it's not only about Matthew 18 principles and peacemaking, but you mentioned it in the aspect of forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was like, oh, that's so true. I mean, that was one of the things that really stuck out to me in the book. It was just like, holy cow. I needed that reminder. It is a journey. I mean, it took me a while at times to be able to do that. And, and people are like, well, sometimes you just have to let go and let God. It kills me every time I hear that.
It's like, please stop putting that on t-shirts.
Right. But there was a point when I said, God, I can't do this anymore.
Well, there's a difference between letting go and letting God, which I don't believe. Anyway, there's a difference between that and surrender.
Yes. Great way to put that. Yes.
There's a vast difference. And really, these leadership development lessons, and especially as wounded pastors, we read all the books. We dive into these things. We know them, but they're clouded by the emotional and spiritual hurt. Yep. And so they don't take root.
Yep.
And so really the spiritual development chapter is getting yourself to the point where now you can start growing some of those foundations and becoming, learning things that, and a lot of those things that I've learned over leadership development is like, I read them and I'm like, I knew this. But I'm, when I get into the battle, I'm so beat up by the fog of war that I can't find that tool,
right?
And it's removing all the weeds to be able to find those tools and actually start to use them.
Yeah. One of the things we teach in our Servants by Design leadership course, and it's not a shameless plug again. Sorry.
That's fine. I'm not offended at all.
But one of the things we teach is stress begets distress. So, but we have to say, before we teach or do any of our trainings for our trainers, we have to make sure we use those skills for ourselves to meet our own motivational, psychological needs, so that we're in a good place to work with people who are in distress.
You've heard the statement, doctors make the worst patients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Don't you say that in the book? I think you say that in the book.
I think I do. Yeah. It's just like pastors make the worst patients, man. We're terrible at it.
Yep. All right, everybody. Hey, we are already at just over the hour mark. So I want to make sure that we take time for some questions and answers and go through the chat.
Absolutely.
Cal at the beginning, I already said hey to Cal. Cal, hopefully you're still here. Good to have you here with us. Charlie Mickelson, is that your nephew?
That is my nephew, man.
That is awesome.
Great kid, man.
You're right. That's awesome. Charlie, thanks for joining us. Josh is here. Hey, Josh Tanner, how are you? Nice brotherly support. I love it.
Great looking guy.
Yeah. If anybody missed that at the beginning, they're twins.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Josh did say this: even in the difficult situations, we can look to the lives that were changed under our leadership, even our struggle there.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to point out on that. And I promise that was not, I didn't put him up to that. But one of the things that it kept me going through the emotional spiritual strategies I look back is, even in the most difficult ministries, there was always at least one or two individuals that were just glorious fruit of the ministry. My last one, there's a young couple who he's now in seminary. I was able to lead him and his wife both to the Lord, and even in a difficult situation, there's always fruit that come out. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to that and go,
Mm,
it's never empty. It's never completely dry.
mm,
So you hang on to those things that nothing returns void. I mean, there's always fruit in even in the most difficult of ministries.
mm, that's good. Thank you. Thanks, Josh, for mentioning that. Matt, thanks for going into more detail on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ace Chambers. Hey, Ace. um, here's what he says. He says, if a pastor has been wounded a number of times by different churches, does the pastor start questioning themselves and their call? And is it harder to go through the emotional and spiritual healing?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm one of those. And after each subsequent time it happened, I went to my wife and I said, I'm done. I did that proverbial, I'm never going to ministry again. I don't know how many times through my experience, I I I started to buy into some of the lies, even some of the things that people said. Maybe I did miss my calling. Maybe I did just go into ministry because my dad was a pastor, and you begin to believe some of those lies of the enemy, and so you absolutely question your call, and that's where
Mm,
you have to go back to an anchor. And pastors, especially wounded pastors, if you don't have an anchor verse in God's word that details your call, um, if you don't have that, go start praying and do not stop until God tells you. For mine, it's 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show yourself approved workman, accurately handling the word of truth. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to that. The other one is 2 Timothy. Oh no, sorry. I just said 2 Timothy. Philippians 4:8, 9. Whatever's
amen.
true, whatever's honorable, whatever's just,
Mhm,
think on these things. Um, because in that storm, you've got to go back to that anchor and say, "This is what God said to bring me into ministry. This is what sustains me."
mhm,
So don't beat yourself up by questioning the call. That's natural. It is harder to go through the emotional and spiritual healing. And this is where it's very important, especially if you've been through this numerous times. Go find somebody to walk through the journey with you. Do not do this in isolation, because you need those people, somebody to, if you can't find it, email me, call me, I'll talk with you. Because you need some of those guys to remind you you're not broken. This is normal for this process. It is harder to go through it, but let me give you some hope. It's not impossible to go through it. And I'm finding some of the anchors that are some of the pillars that I built the first time I went through it, you do fall back on, and build even more on the second time. So it is harder. It is possible. It is natural to question the call. However, God will still bring that back. Just because you're wounded by the quote unquote bride of Christ doesn't mean they're exactly right. Doesn't mean the things that they have said is right. Doesn't mean that you're broken. Um, as far as your call. Now, there's some things you got to fix. There's some things you got to heal in. Um, but go back to that anchor. You can get through the process. You can heal and get to a very good spot. So
mhm.
it's
Good.
amazing question. Absolutely.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Ace. Let's see. Charlie, good job. Amen. Oh, here's another one by Ace. How much does it help to network with other pastors who have been there or are there? And so you just spoke a little bit
Yeah,
about that, but let's go into more detail on that.
absolutely. Here's the thing, and I even said this before. I've lost track of how many times when I've talked to pastors that have gone through this. and it's very, very isolating, and it makes you think you're the only one that's it's ever gone through. But the reality is there's tens of thousands, if not hundred thousands, of pastors who go through this on a yearly basis. So it's a bigger club than it needs to be. I mean, really,
Mm.
it doesn't need to be one, but um, you know, but also the emotional emotional pain, the post traumatic spiritual stress, all of those things. There's a lot about this phenomenon that isolates. Questioning the call. I'm broken. You know, I'm not in ministry. It's really awkward for me to go sit in the pew
Yeah.
and worry, is the pastor going to feel threatened that I'm there, going to take over his ministry? All of these different things
Right. Yeah.
that you go through. So
I spent how many years in seminary and now I'm here.
yeah, they're going to go, well, look at you, you couldn't hack it. All of these lies
Yeah.
that happen. And so there's so many things about this phenomenon that are isolating to you. So you have to push through those lies and find someone to connect with. And that's one of my dreams about the Wounded Pastor, is to turn this into not just a one-off book, but turn it into a network. Have a place on the website that pastors can connect. Hey, I'm a wounded pastor. I need somebody in my area. Here you go. Connect these guys together, because I guarantee you there's others out there, and there's probably those that are close to you. So yeah, Ace, thank you for that question. And I want to put myself out there. You can put my emails, thewoundedpastor@gmail.com.
Okay.
Contact me. As this goes live or goes later and people do this, I will try to answer as quick as I can, but because hopefully it gets bigger than I can control it, and let God deal with it, let God grow it. But man, reach out to me. We'll get some time to talk, because there's we've got to stand. Let me say it this way. Let me go back to the military. One of the things that my Marine friend told me is, one of the things they do in all the armed forces is you're always sent out with a battle buddy. If the secular military can figure that out, why, as we as pastors, cannot seem to figure out that we can't do this by ourselves? It just blows my mind. So find that.
Let me clarify something here real quick though, because
Yeah, please.
When you talk about sending out with another buddy, I've heard a couple of different issues, and hopefully you can clarify this. They're like, well, don't let it be someone in the church, because guaranteed they'll probably hurt you later on. So are you really discussing like another pastor in town that you get together and have coffee with and support one another?
Yeah, either another pastor in town, or reach out to a network of somebody that's been there. Man, if you can connect with a fellow wounded pastor that may be a little bit further in the process,
in the journey.
Or y'all might be just stuck in the economic basement together crying. I mean,
right.
But yeah, if you can network with somebody else that's been out there, and let's get rid of the stigma of the phenomenon and say, yes, I'm a wounded pastor. I've been through this. It's okay to admit you're broken. Let's heal together. So yeah, I appreciate that clarification. Don't just pick up anybody, because people within the church, especially the church you came from, non-pastors, especially non-wounded pastors, may not understand. But they're out there. But if you can find a fellow wounded pastor that y'all can work together. Now, the danger of that is you as wounded pastors, you can just end up staying in one category together. You've got to spur one another on to good things, as Hebrews says. But yeah, absolutely network with somebody. And that's something I hope to do with the wounded pastor, is create a place where that can happen.
Okay.
And people can share their stories, things like that. I even put the template for the interview that I used for people to share their stories. So I hope to have a place on the website. People can go, hey, here's my story. And we can kind of start connecting these guys to heal together.
I love it. So we will revisit that. So yeah, everybody, you heard it here. We're going to start a network. He's going to get on the website.
I better write. Hold on, I'm gonna make a note.
Yeah, you better add it to the to-do list.
Right.
Oh gosh, that's so funny. All right. Well, A does say thank you, Matt, serving pastors in this way. So
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
thank you.
It's a labor I wish I didn't have because of the pain of it, but I'm glad that God has led me to this, um, I will say this: the majority of pastors that go through this end up never going back into ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So my prayer with this is that we can bring attention to it, but also we can get guys to heal, because man, the church needs leaders. The church needs pastors, and we got to get some of the guys like me, like you guys, to heal and get back in the game and be used by God. Fulfill the calling that you already know you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Woo! All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Matt, any final thoughts or words that you want to share? Buy your book. I'll say it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, just guys, help. And this is where I'm the worst at marketing and selling myself. But I'm not selling Matt Tanner. I'm selling a healing strategy that I know works, that will help these guys heal. So thank you, Stephen, to you for Servants by Design to not only putting on this platform, but man, there's some exciting things coming up on some other platforms that you've connected me with, to get the word out there.
Right. Let me do that plug real quick.
Yeah,
For those,
absolutely.
I'm also the operations manager at Simplify Church. And at Simplify Church, we do accounting services, amongst other things, giving platforms and stuff for churches all across the United States. And so I'm very excited about being a part of that network. There are pastors there that are going through these types of things, and we're able to network with them. The owner, Josh Henry, is really committed towards supporting pastors. The goal at Simplify Church is to help do the books and finances so that the pastor has more time for ministry. So I'm excited because as he is part of support for that, the team there, the podcast, Mike Whittemore, Greg Braswell, great guys, and you're going to be on their podcast soon. And I just encourage everybody, look it up on, I know it's on Apple and Spotify, but the Simplified Church podcast. And
yeah, so that's coming down the pike, and some other things that will be out there. I'll be sharing it on the website and on my social media and that sort of thing. You got my email. Wounded pastors can connect with me there, but just help me get the word out, because I know there's a lot of guys that need this.
Yep. And for those of wounded pastors, I'm going to say this again. I said it halfway through. Please use the connect at servantsbydesign.com. I'll put that up on the screen. It is in the chat there. I am making an offer for pastors who have been wounded to get our Free to Be Me profile for free. And I'll do a personal debrief with you as well, just to be an encouragement to you, because as you said, you're that first step, that financial step. So we want to bring you healing, and we don't want that cost to be a factor for you. So we want to do that. Also, don't forget that be looking on the website right now, thewoundedpastor.wordpress.com. Eventually it'll be Wounded Leadership. It's not The Wounded Leadership, it's just Wounded Leadership, right?
The website, woundedleadership.com.
Yeah, so that's coming soon. I don't have a banner printed for it yet.
That's okay. I didn't have that ready for you.
That's all right. So, but be on the lookout at that for some groups to help support. I know Simplified Church is working on some groups coming up soon to help pastors as well. If you go to our website, servantsbydesign.com, we are doing a special on our Free to Be Me courses and our Servants by Design leadership course, which is the leadership course is really about how to connect with people at the speed of conversation to best encourage and motivate them. It's a beautiful tool. It is why I bought the company several years ago, because I believe in it. I believe in how it is helping churches all across the country. And so what we're doing is we're doing a special discount, 40% off of our courses. We have free courses as well. You can go to the communicateforchange.teachable.com link/courses. It lists all of ours. We do have other ones there that are for free. There is a pastor resiliency webinar on there it's an hour long, that is totally free, that introduces some of the concepts of Servants by Design there. But if you decide you want the Free to Be Me course or the leadership course, it is 40% off using the code podcast. Our goal, again, Servants by Design, is to help you live a healthier, more connected, spirit-filled life with yourself, with God, and with others. And Matt, your book just fits right into that. We want to help support you and however we can, because we're committed to the church.
Absolutely.
And I'll be open with you. It took me a while, it did. It took me a while. And so I know, and everybody listening out there, if you've got, someone who needs help, have them reach out to us.
Absolutely.
We want to be helpful. And again, that's the email. I think we posted it for you.
Yeah, it is thewoundedpastor@gmail.com. I want to make sure you get that "the" on there, because it won't get there if you don't.
Yeah, the wounded pastor at gmail.com. Let's see if I can get that up on the screen. Perfect. There we go.
That's perfect. There it is.
They're on the fly, everybody.
Hey, that's good. I like that.
All right. Well, Matt, once again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. It has been insightful. And I can't wait to see the fruits of men's lives being changed, pastors' lives being changed and encouraged, just because of the work that you're doing. So thank you so much just for being open to what God would have for you in writing this book. Whereas I know I don't wish this journey on anyone, but I do want to say thank you for just being steadfast in that journey.
Well, Stephen, thank you for having me and giving me this platform and connecting this partnership. I see much more developing with this and reconnecting. And man, this has been a blast. So I can't thank you enough for putting all this together for me, man.
Yeah, you are very welcome.
Love it.
Yep. Well, all right, everybody. Don't forget to check us out on the respective websites that are there in the chat. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and just pray that God continues to bless you and help you and walk with you on this journey. He loves you and he is there with you. So don't forget that he is ever present no matter where you are. All right, everybody. Be blessed. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks.